Hi, everyone. I'm Ellie Johnston. I'm the Climate and Energy Lead at Climate Interactive. Thank you all for joining today for our third session in the Mastering En-ROADS training series. Today, I'll be talking about the climate action simulation. I'll talk about the different elements of it and why we use role-playing games in general. Before I get started, I know many of you all have joined a webinar with us before and are probably getting familiar with the GoToWebinar system, but the questions box, that's your way to communicate with us. Today on the line, in addition to myself, we have Caroline Reed, Janet Tchaikovsky, and I think even Drew Jones might be in the background there answering a few questions, and Travis as well. Oh, and Yasmin Zahar as well. We have a big team kind of listening in. They'll be there to answer any questions you have as you write them in. So feel free to write your questions into the questions box. If you have a more in-depth question or would like to follow up later, you can always send us an email at support@climateinteractive.org, and we'll be happy to get back to you there. This is the third webinar in the training series. As I mentioned last week, Drew went over the En-ROADS climate workshop, and then next week, I'll be going into the first round of the En-ROADS simulation dynamics, and we'll be talking about the different sliders, some of the advanced settings and aspects of En-ROADS. But today, we're going to be focusing on the climate action simulation game. Before I do that, though, I want to note that we really, really appreciate all of you all that took seriously Drew's homework assignment last week and practiced using En-ROADS with your household, your friends and family that you're living with, or a couple of you jumped onto Zoom or an online webinar platform to try out testing En-ROADS. So that was really great to see. And we were even more excited to see that some of you all even took it so far as to share En-ROADS with your pets. So thanks to Donna and Julia, who sent in pictures of them and their dogs exploring En-ROADS, and you all, we really love these photos. And Caroline and I were taking a look at this earlier. I'm going to zoom in here. Is this dog really into En-ROADS, or is that a treat in Donna's hand there? I don't know. Maybe there was some bribery going on to get those dogs excited about En-ROADS, but I guess whatever it takes, you all. We know not everybody is into climate action. Maybe some people are just there for the treats, but those were fun to see. If you didn't get a chance last week to do a practice session of the En-ROADS workshop, feel free to do it this week. Send us your pictures again. We always love to see those and share them with you all. So that's out there. So the sections to this webinar today, I'll talk about the context, parts of the climate action simulation, and then talk about some of the variations and aspects of this. At the end of the webinar today, we'll have two guest speakers, Florian Kappmeier and Kurt Newton, who will talk to them about their experiences of using the climate action simulation with the groups that they've worked with. So stay tuned for that at the end as well. And I know some of you all may be joining us for the first time. You haven't sat through the previous webinars. And just to put the climate action simulation in context, is we really see En-ROADS, the climate solution simulator, being used within a range of different applications. And we have the En-ROADS climate workshop. This is what Drew discussed last week. The climate action simulation, that's what we're going to be going into today. There's also a student exercise that you can use. Particularly, I know there are educators out there, you might be interested in giving En-ROADS as a homework assignment. You can look this guided assignment up on our website. We also use En-ROADS and media interactives, and really the possibilities of where this tool might go, we're still exploring, and you all may have ideas for as well. Could it fit into a video game? Might it look like, what might it look like in any kind of other different form? We don't really know the limits here, and are excited by the ideas that you all have brought to us so far. But so for the climate action simulation, so this is a group role-playing game where the participants are playing global leaders from sectors across business, government, and civil society that are gathered together to negotiate a climate solutions plan that limits warming to less than 2 degrees. The context of this is a UN Secretary General, UN official is convening a summit with the Paris Climate Agreement still in existence, but trying to bring stakeholders from different sectors, business leaders, civil society leaders, to discuss and come up with some additional climate actions to actually make the reductions in emissions necessary to achieve the goals of the Paris Climate Agreement. And of course, at the heart of it is the En-ROADS climate simulator, which is used to test the policies and proposals that each of the different groups propose. So there are typically 6 different groups within the climate action simulation: conventional energy, representing your fossil fuel industry and interests, clean tech, land, agriculture, and forestry, industry and commerce, representing your electric car companies, your energy efficiency, service providers. Then there's a governments group. Sometimes there's 3 different governments groups, depending on how you want to play it. And the climate justice hawks, that's our activist group. But you might be asking yourselves, why do we focus and put all of this attention to creating this format of a simulation game? Well, the climate action simulation itself, we've written up a paper about it that was published last year in Simulation and Gaming. And there we had a bunch of focus group participants play the climate action simulation, and we found that they were overwhelmingly positive about it, and that in particular, it left them feeling empowered to make a positive difference in addressing the climate challenge. This finding also aligns with a study that we had published a couple years ago about another one of our role-playing games, the World Climate Simulation, which is more along the lines of a traditional UN climate negotiation where people are playing China, India, different country groups, and working to make pledges to reduce emissions. It's less about the suite of solutions, but World Climate, I know many of you all out there may have participated in it, or maybe facilitators, and that's another option out there in terms of our role-playing games. And with the World Climate Simulation, our study found that 83% of the participants reported that they are more likely to take action as a result of participating in that role-playing experience. And so in the past year or so, we've been developing the climate action simulation to build on that experience. And really the top insights that are typically delivered with the climate action simulation are very similar to those that come from the En-ROADS climate workshop. You know, there's no silver bullet solution to climate change. It's going to take more than one seed to plant the garden of action that's going to be needed to address climate change. Many sectors and many actions in many sectors are required, but we can do it. There are pathways and scenarios in which we can avoid the worst case scenarios on climate change. And with this, keeping coal, oil, and gas in the ground is really vital. And also, En-ROADS can provide an entryway into opening up important conversations about where there are near-term co-benefits, whether that may be from improved air quality or increased jobs that could come with some of the climate solutions. And you can use En-ROADS as an entry point to conversations and discussions around co-benefits as well as equity. So here's a picture from January of Florian Kappmeier, who you'll hopefully get to hear from later, of his students in his business class participating in the climate action simulation. Of course, these days, the climate action simulation events, they're all happening online and in virtual settings. So throughout the webinar today, I'm going to be mixing in the elements of the game that are played in person, as well as trying to offer some of the tips of what you might consider as we run it online. And note that we hope that at some future point down the road, not too far away, we can get back to running them in person. But for now, definitely the socially, physically distant versions of the climate action simulation in online formats are the way to go. And they present some challenges. We recognize that, and some of the nuances around web platforms and that kind of thing can be tricky to navigate. So we're trying to support you all as best we can in navigating that if the climate action simulation is something that you want to pursue yourself. And of course, there's always the workshop too. So again, 6 different teams. In a typical climate action simulation game, you have them divided up. Or if you prefer, or if you have a larger group, maybe you have more time to manage, you might use the 8 sector group. So this then, instead of having world governments as one group, you break the group into developed nations, developing nations, as well as the rapidly emerging nations. This way you can help, the groups can hold a set of interests more strongly. World governments, of course, is a very generalized grouping of a lot of different interests. In addition to the government group, you have your activists, your conventional energy group, clean tech, industry and commerce, land, agriculture, and forestry. And the way it begins is, think about one of the key elements of our role-playing experiences is to set up the experience itself by bringing the drama, helping people to get into their roles, helping people set themselves up to have fun with it. And so in the virtual setting, we have been playing around with and utilizing this feature that is, I've seen within the Zoom web conferencing platform, where you can do virtual backgrounds. So here on the left, you see somebody with the conventional energy team there with some smokestacks in their background, and the leading facilitator there using a scene from the United Nations as their backdrop and the UN flag in another setting. In person, this could look like, you know, putting some food on the table of the conventional energy group to give them more resources, and perhaps putting the developing nations group on the floor to highlight the inequity that exists in our world. So have fun with it, come up with something creative. This can be lighthearted as a way to just kind of help remind people of the differences in power across these different stakeholder groups and across our world. To set the context and to help people understand what they're about to do, we have briefing statements. These briefing statements you can give to your participants in advance. We recommend that you do that if you can, but that's not always possible. Sometimes we don't know who's going to show up to the webinar or the event right until they actually do show up, and at which point then the briefing statements could then be handed out. And we have these also, I'll note, we do have briefing statements available in many different languages. They're not quite on the website yet. They will be coming to the website soon. You can contact us if you are looking for the briefing statements in French or German or Spanish or Portuguese. We have several different languages, and we'll be getting those up online soon. The other handout that we recommend passing along to participants before beginning is the EnROADS One Guide to the Control Panel. You see that here, and this is a way for participants to familiarize themselves with the different sliders and levers that they have at their hands to change in light of the EnROADS tool. And so the way the whole exercise works is, first, you as the facilitator, or maybe your co-facilitator, somebody supporting you, plays a UN official, either the UN Secretary General or the UNFCCC Executive Secretary, and takes on that role, maybe puts on a jacket or a blazer or scarf, tie, whatever seems most appropriate. And if you have the ability to use the virtual backgrounds, set yourself within the scene of a UN negotiation hall, and then deliver an opening speech in which you bring the gravitas and the formality that a UN official might bring to an actual negotiation. And in this, you can open it up and set the context by talking about the climate crisis, talking about the challenges our world faces currently. You could provide some background on the fact that we already have the Paris Climate Agreement, and we need to fulfill those commitments and goals that countries have already agreed on, and set some personal context. You might, point to the conventional energy group and highlight some fictional or perhaps real impact that they're facing and try and create a situation in which why you have convened everyone together to talk about this global action plan, climate action plan that you're coming up with. If you have questions or would like more inspiration on what this opening speech might entail, I would encourage you to check out our facilitator guide. We'll be sending a link to it in the follow-up email. This is the Climate Action Simulation Facilitator Guide. As well, we also have several videos of different people across our team and ambassadors leading the climate action simulation and giving this opening speech. So you can see some other people modeling it as well. And then after that opening speech, then this is where you turn to the different groups, your 6 groups, your 8 groups, however many you have, and they break into their round 1 team meetings. During this time, each team selects a delegate who is going to make a 2-minute speech back to the entire group, and in which they're going to propose their policy action. And this will be 1 action per round, and each group can either propose to add a new solution. So a group could propose, we want to see more afforestation, or they could remove a previous action. Perhaps they're the conventional energy group and they're not happy that a tax has been applied to natural gas. Then they could remove it if another group had added it previously. Then as groups propose their policies, you as a facilitator or your co-facilitators that are supporting you, somebody who's familiar with En-ROADS will add each action into En-ROADS and evaluate the results together. And then after every group has proposed one action, then the round closes, and we can go into a 2nd round or a 3rd round if there's time. And a key part of this too, as groups go into their negotiation rounds, is you can ask your participants to, in their speeches, when they come back to the larger group, to identify a near-term co-benefit from their proposals. For example, how can you address more than one problem with one action? So if a group is proposing to support afforestation, for example, you might encourage them, okay, what are the benefits of planting trees? And they might identify things like job creation or increased forest cover and things like that. And you might also encourage them to examine how they can ensure with their actions that marginalized communities are not disproportionately burdened or left out. So in the case of afforestation, that could mean that the group proposing this action says something along the lines of, and we will make sure that these new forests are not planted on lands that would otherwise be used for growing food or something like that. And encourage people to think about that. If you have time, they could research it and dive into that more. So here is the negotiations happening. This is the prompt that you would give the participants. So start by looking over the En-ROADS control panel, identify the 2 or 3 actions that you most strongly support or oppose by looking at that En-ROADS control panel guide, and then kind of think about what the strategy is, what are the interests of a particular group, and then think about what you're going to say in that 2-minute speech. So here is somebody playing climate justice hawks, and you can see they've added their background in the virtual setting and say something like, as the climate justice hawks, we propose to employ a price on carbon. And so what would happen at that point is they would give their speech and everyone might applaud, and then the facilitator playing the UN official and the person using En-ROADS would then put in a carbon price and talk about the different dynamics of a carbon price within En-ROADS as that's being played out. And then after that's done, then move on to the next group and take their proposal and see what they're interested in. So you can share the En-ROADS insights. So I'll just do this very quickly as an example. So say you all out there are playing clean tech, and somebody write into the questions box a proposal of what a group playing clean tech might call on to ask for and propose as a first step in En-ROADS. And Caroline, see what people are writing in there and let me know what you see. If you were playing clean tech, what might you propose as a policy solution?
Yep, and we're just waiting a second for people's answers to come in.
And usually for that negotiation round, give people 10 to 15 minutes in which they'd come up with these policies. They would give their speech. I won't ask you all to give a speech today, but just tell me what your potential policy might be.
Okay, a couple of people have said maybe we invest in some new technology.
Okay, new technology. So that's right here. And new technology is a new source of energy that we don't yet have. This could be something like nuclear fusion or something that's very much in development in the laboratories, but not commercially available yet. And so to add a new technology, I would move this slider up. But before I do that, I want you all to think about what might happen. So again, here we are looking at the EnROADS interface. On the left, we're looking at our global sources of primary energy. On the right here, I'm showing greenhouse gas net emissions. If we had some new technology that was incredibly cheap and wildly successful, it's this orange line here, and that shot up, what do you think would happen to greenhouse gas net emissions as well as temperature change? And mentally simulate that in your mind, and here, I'll ramp it up. So, and with the climate action simulation pledges, I normally think of it as like, you just move the label once. So as you play with the sliders, you'll notice that you can make things go up very high or not, but just move it halfway. So here we've had a breakthrough in the new technology. Let me replay that and you can see what happened. So with that breakthrough in new technology, you can see this orange line is going from where it didn't exist before to now being a part of the energy mix. And as a result, notice what comes down here. So in particular, I'm noticing that this dark brown line of coal is moving quite a significant bit because this new technology is cheaper than coal. And so it's coming in and competing with coal, as well as all the other energy sources. You'll see that they also are coming down. Renewables comes down and natural gas. And as a result of this new technology taking off, you see that it curbs some greenhouse gas emissions. And so by the end of the century, we've now limited warming by an additional 0.2 degrees. So some progress there. And then as the official going into this, I would say thank you, clean tech, and let's have our next participant. How about send up a representative from land, agriculture, and forestry, who would then give their proposal, and we would then move on. But just as a sample of what we could do here, I'm going to go back and keep rolling through the different aspects of the role-playing game to give you all a sense. So after you've taken pledges from all of the different groups, enter into a second round of negotiations. And oftentimes in the second round of negotiations, things become a little bit more heated between the groups. Groups have gotten a chance to see the different positions, the ways that the other groups are playing the game. You know, perhaps conventional energy is being very difficult and maybe not taking proactive action on climate change, and other groups might decide to go negotiate with them and figure out if they can come up with a deal to break through. This can be a really fun aspect of the game. And in the online setting, what we really are encouraging is to find a web platform in which you can use breakout groups. This is something that the Zoom platform utilizes. You can also simulate this with, say, a WhatsApp group text or a shared Google Doc that each group has access to, and then other groups are able to get access to it to be able to participate and have the negotiations. But if you have innovations here, we'd love to hear about them. We're very curious all of the different ways in which people are figuring out to run the climate action simulation in a virtual settings. But like the first round, in the second round of negotiations, the groups get together, and in 15 to 20 minutes, they discuss their follow-up actions as a team, identify what their next pledge might be and identify somebody within their group who could then propose it to the larger group when everyone returns. And then if there are negotiations within the group, within the other groups, they can do that as needed. So then a similar thing would happen. Everyone comes back to the main room, and as the facilitator, you get another chance to share the different insights from En-ROADS and talk about what the policies and actions that the different groups are taking are proposing. After that's done, make sure you leave some time for a debrief of the game. So this is an opportunity to take a step back, ask your participants to take off their role-playing hats and return to themselves, and talk about some of the insights that they had while going through the experience. This can be an important way to just solidify and capture those different learning moments and the different things that came up for people as they played the climate action simulation. So you could ask questions like, what surprised you? What were your key insights? Or what we take away from this experience? This is also a time where, you know, we really encourage you to take a minute and have people silently reflect on their experience. So have them think about what they would love about being a part of the scenario that they've created. Some of you all may have seen Drew or others on our team do this in past webinars with the En-ROADS Climate Workshop. So this we've found to be a powerful way of just pausing to give people a chance to reflect on the experience. You can ask people also how they're feeling. The climate action simulation can be very animated and dramatic and fun, and people can get really worked up about it. So it's always interesting to also check in and ask people about how they're feeling. The other thing that you can do during the debrief is if you're running the game in a context in which you have particular follow-up actions, maybe you're running it within a community group and you have a specific campaign you want to funnel people into, use the debrief as a chance to talk about what people can do in terms of personal climate action. And there are slides within the slide deck that we make available about the climate action simulation that will go into that in more depth. So, and then the other thing, the final thing, don't forget, is grab a photo with your group. Have everyone wave at the camera as they're sitting in their houses participating, or if you're in person, get everyone together to take a group photo. It's always lots of fun. And we love, again, I mentioned this at the beginning, we do really love seeing your pictures of people participating and using En-ROADS out there. So feel free to send them to us and we'll share them with the rest of the world and all of you all out there participating. One important thing about running the climate action simulation is we really encourage you to create a space where both the facilitator, you yourself, and the participants can improvise. It is a different kind of facilitation to run a game like this, but it can be so much fun for everyone involved. And Caroline, maybe you can speak a little bit about what is going on in this screenshot here. It says corporate espionage, conventional energy delegates using En-ROADS trying to put themselves in a better position. What's going on here?
Yeah, of course. So I've been running a few of the games in the last few weeks, and it actually ended up happening in 2 separate games. Our conventional energy team had prematurely accessed the En-ROADS simulator before we shared the link. So this was in the first round of negotiations. And when our facilitator dropped in and found this, they took a screenshot, brought it back to the main room, pasted it in the slide deck. And then when we allowed participants to come back in and begin making their proposals, we put the slide up and called it corporate espionage, calling them out on taking an advantage over the other teams. And it really evokes some funny and exciting responses. You know, you see other teams getting competitive or, you know, challenging them, saying that's not fair. And you can see on the bottom right of this slide, one participant had renamed themselves, deeming themselves I am Greta. They were part of the Climate Justice Hawks. So Greta was particularly outraged and actually decided to interrupt the conventional energy's proposal by unmuting themselves And so then within that game, we ended up having to throw them out or mute them. You know, we would never actually kick them out. And so it really just opened up the experience to a lot of creative moments and improvisation. And these are just a few examples of how the game could go in so many ways that make it better for both the facilitators and for the participants.
Yeah, and I don't know if you all can see, I realize the text on the slide is kind of small, but down there in the far right corner, from the person who renamed themselves, I am Greta, they're writing, Exxon Rexon would like you to believe there is no harm to their action. We must reinvent the economy. We cannot sit idly by while our futures are robbed from us. So that's just a small snapshot of how one climate action simulation unfolded, and obviously created a pretty memorable experience for all the participants involved. And that's been really fun to see. Here's another picture of some of the snapshots we've gotten from climate action simulations. A few tips on running this in an online format. One is that you do need quite a bit of time. So we're suggesting around 3 hours. This could be done in 2 1.5-hour sessions. I know some of you all that might be interested in this are educators. Maybe you're working with a class that meets once a week or something like that. This can be a good way to divide it up over time. Or you can run it in a 3-hour block. I believe Caroline and Florian ran one recently that was over 4 hours of participation, and it seems like a lot of time in some sense, but because people are moving and talking amongst each other, and then talking in a larger group and listening to different dynamics of En-ROADS, it really does go by pretty fast. So would encourage you to just try it and not be too concerned about the time allocation. It's just, you know, some of it is about getting people to show up. I realize that. Another piece, bring the drama. Talk about a couple of these different elements, dressing up, using the Zoom backgrounds if you've got that feature. You could experiment even with putting props in your own background if you don't have a virtual background set up. Think about ways to make it creative and fun, calling out corporate so-and-so corporate espionage as the game unfolds. So far, we've had the best success in running the climate action simulation in an online environment with a platform that allows breakout groups or group chat features. I mentioned Zoom is one that we found that works pretty well. There may be other platforms out there that also have that functionality and would work well too. As I mentioned, send participants the guide to the control panel as well as the briefing statements beforehand if you can, but if you can't, it's okay too. Just make sure to give participants a little bit of time to get oriented as to what they're doing. For the 1-minute speeches, unmute speakers, get different voices in the room. This can be fun, and sometimes those speeches can be pretty poignant and funny and powerful at the same time. But if you're running short too, you can ask people to just propose things in a chat box or a questions box if that's what you have. One tip, you can do this if you like, no worries if you don't want to, but halfway through, send participants the link to the scenario that you all have built. So you could say, there has been a leak from the UNEP, so this is the UN Environmental Program. They have sent out the scenario, and then groups in that second round of negotiations could have access to En-ROADS in their discussions and think about which actions might be the most strategic to apply to the current scenario that they're developing. So those are some of the tips. Also, yeah, we have videos. We'll send a link to some of those videos in the follow-up email that you all will receive after the webinar today. Here's the general overview of the climate action simulation again. Introductions, put people into their groups, have an opening presentation from the UN official, then go into a round of team meetings followed by speeches and looking at the results of En-ROADS. Then you can go into a second round, which is very similar to the first. And if there's time, additional rounds and a photo, as well as take time for that debrief at the end to really solidify those insights. For the climate action simulation, we have lots of materials available on our website that you can explore and dig into. Let me just pull this up and I will show you on our website. So here's the page for the climate action simulation. You can get to it by going under Tools, Climate Action Simulation Game, scrolling down here. And over here on the right, if you click on Game Materials, find your way to the Game Materials page. And here you'll find all of the materials we have. The Facilitator Guide, which goes into more in depth of a lot of what I'm describing here today. The presentation slides to support you as a facilitator in walking through all the different elements. This includes things like the prompts of what you want to ask your participants to do during each round. We also have supplemental slides. These includes more slides on things like climate impacts and different trends we see in renewable energy out there. Of course, link to the En-ROADS simulator itself. And we have added some tips here for running the game online. And then below, you can find links to all of the different briefing statements, as well as additional materials out there. So we have everything there to provide you, to support you in using the game, and we'll send out links to that. But if you are running the climate action simulation or any event with En-ROADS, we ask you to please register it. We are putting a lot of work, and we love sharing this tool and all of the different resources with you all, and feel very fortunate to be able to do this, provide all of this for free. But the only thing we are really asking in return is that you tell us when you do run events. This helps us share the experiences with everyone around the world, and build the case to the people and organizations and philanthropies that do support us, and show them all the good work that's happening as a result of this. So please register your events as you run them. We really appreciate that. I'll take a few minutes here to talk about some of the variations of the climate action simulation, and then I think I'll check to see if Kurt or Florian has joined, and then give them a few minutes to share their experience. So there are a few different variations. So one, I mentioned this earlier, but you could give participants access to En-ROADS halfway through. There's the En-ROADS student assignment. The En-ROADS guided assignment is a resource that you can use particularly as a follow-up to the climate action simulation. So maybe you run the climate action simulation, you don't get a scenario towards 2 degrees, you could have as a follow-up, point your students to the En-ROADS guided assignment, and they could explore this as a way of creating their own scenario. So basically it's a worksheet, it's with different prompts to help students explore what are some of the policies and actions that are needed to create less than 2 degree scenario. So that's available if you're interested in using that. And another way in which, another variation to the climate action simulation is to pair it with our world climate simulation. So I discussed this a little, I mentioned world climate at the very beginning of the webinar. This is another role-playing game that we have. Instead of being based around these stakeholder groups and having the discussion oriented around particular interventions and policies, the world climate simulation focuses on emissions reduction pledges. So within the world climate, you have groups playing China and India and the United States and the European Union making commitments like, we want to peak our emissions in 2030. We want to reduce our emissions 3% per year. So you can run the world climate simulation, go through all of that discussion, and then follow it with a climate action simulation, which is no longer talking about reductions pledges, but basically, what is it going to take to fulfill those pledges? What are is it going to take, does energy efficiency reduce greenhouse gas emissions substantially, and different aspects like that. World Climate uses our 𝐶Roads simulation tool, and Climate Action Simulation, of course, uses En-ROADS. En-ROADS is global, and 𝐶Roads focuses on different regional actions, but looking still at the global picture in terms of temperature change. The other way, variation to the climate action simulation is to add different groups, customize the groups. Maybe you want to have an electric car lobby group or a Brazil group, I don't know. But you're welcome to create new briefing statements and add new groups. And if you do come up with new innovations, we'd be interested to hear about them, hear about your experiences and what works and that kind of thing. So from here, I'm going to turn it over to Professor Florian 𝑘𝑎𝑃�្𝑚𝑬. Florian, could you tell us a little bit about your experience of using the climate action simulation if you are on the line? And you can go ahead and unmute yourself and we can take it from here.
Unmute.
Yeah, there you are, Florian.
Oh, yeah. Okay, great. Thank you very much, Ellie, for the invitation to talk here. And hi, everybody. I'm happy to share some of my experiences. I think the climate action simulation is a fantastic way to engage people and to have them think about how we can mitigate the climate crisis. It is why it is so fascinating and so engaging is because we are taking off the emotions much more intensely than, for example, in the EnROADS workshop, in which you might have heard about the EnROADS workshop webinar or have attended it. In the climate action simulation, what I love about it is that how fantastically the participants dive into their roles and how they identify with the roles that they are playing. And no matter which ones of these roles these are, it is always working. The briefing statements are very well written and put together. And in the very beginning, when I had one of my first role-playing games, when I was facilitating them, I was wondering, how does it work? How do people get into the roles? But I have never had any role-playing simulation where it hasn't worked out. People love doing this and getting in there, and because they are representing different stakeholders in these negotiations, the emotions are affected, and this is studies have shown that our studies have shown that it's the emotions that actually make them feel that they should act. And this is one of the most, for me, one of the most fascinating aspects of these games, the world climate simulation that Ellie has mentioned, as well as the climate action simulation. And I've facilitated these simulations for many years, and I have to say that these are really the highlights of engaging people and people who are interested in both ways. The personal interaction, as you can see here on the picture below, with my students, as well as in the upper one, we have just facilitated one session, Caroline, online a few days ago. And both work just fantastically, this is that's very rewarding. And going through this ambassador training series is helping you understanding the simulator much better, and this also increases your flexibility in order how to react to different comments in the game, because in the game you cannot manage as tightly as, for example, a workshop, because you never know what's coming next. And so going through the seminar series is actually helping you a lot to get more comfortable with the EnROADS simulation model and to know what's behind it and where you find arguments or where you find little details in the model to support an argument by one of the participants. And so when I was standing in your shoes before, I had my first one of these interactive sessions. I have to say that I had much of respect, but actually you should just do it. It is so much fun. It's fun for the participants, both because people just love playing. Adults have forgotten how much fun it is, but I've played with my students, with high school students, 10th graders, all the way up to people, for example, in the German Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and they all love playing these games. And you see how much they like it. As well, you do see they're learning about the climate system, and this is really very rewarding, I have to say. And I'm here for coaching, also everybody who is interested and wants to participate, for example, in one of the sessions, if you are close by, of course, and if it's allowed again, then just come by, and I'm happy to help. Thank you very much, Ellie.
Great, thanks so much, Florian. Really appreciate you sharing some of those insights of your student experience and all of that. We also have on the line today Kurt Newton, who's an En-ROADS Climate Ambassador based in the Boston, Massachusetts area. Kurt, can you tell us a little bit about how you have seen the climate action simulation used?
Yeah, thanks, Ellie. It's great to be with you. And I'll just start by saying, yeah, everything Florian said, spot on. I think very, very well stated, you know, kind of the power and the impact of this simulation game. It's just fun, you know, it's just fun. And if you've been doing climate outreach or climate education for very long, you may have been confronting how it can be hard for people. It can be emotionally draining. Their eyes glaze over because it's just too much data. There's something just so deeply empowering about the role playing that just wakes people up, and it's a blast to facilitate that. You know, I do quite a lot of workshops as well as simulation games, and I'd say one of the great things about the game is the group energy kind of emerges and can carry you forward, where you can kind of get out of the way of it once it gets up and running. You know, the workshop I think requires a more sort of continuous engagement and management of what's going on. But in my experience, when the game is working, it takes on this just beautiful character of its own, and you see people taking in and connecting with the information and what it really means in really powerful ways. You know, if you're able to get people, for instance, to play roles that they don't ordinarily get to play, that can be really, really liberating. You know, I would strongly encourage people to find a few other people in whatever communities you travel in to work through these things together. You know, everybody brings something different. Everybody sees something different in the model. Everybody has a little different approach to how to work with different groups about it. And some of the most, you know, enriching, satisfying experiences have been, you know, when I've been able to team up with somebody who really brings a kind of complementary perspective, whether it's, you know, great depth in some aspects of the science and the modeling, or one of my favorite collaborators, you know, comes from a middle school teaching background, and I learned so much from sort of just like crowd control and management of conversation through running these games with them. So that's really great. You know, I would just say just do it. You can't go wrong, and by becoming an ambassador and joining this broader community, you'll have people from, you know, all over the world, from all different perspectives and all different backgrounds that you can connect with and collaborate with, and you know, I look forward to many of you carrying forward, and you know, the opportunity to learn from you and what your experiences are.
Great, thanks so much, Kurt. And yeah, that's an important insight that you shared there of, you know, find someone to co-facilitate with. You don't have to do this all yourself. Think about somebody out there who you know who might be able to complement your skill sets. Thanks, Kurt and Florian, for sharing those insights. And we will turn over now to questions. And I did see that there was a few questions out there about the difference between the world climate simulation game, which has come up a few times, and the climate action simulation. And here's a slide that just showcases the different groups. Each circle here is representing a different group. So in the world climate simulation, the focus is on country groups. You're using the C-ROAD simulator, China, the US, European Union, other developed countries, India. Those are the 6 different groups. Whereas in the climate action simulation, you have this focus on solutions, proposing things like energy efficiency and carbon pricing. The 2 games can complement each other, but they are different. And you can run them both, or you might choose one or the other. And Caroline, I'll pause here. I imagine that there have been many questions coming in. What are some good questions that you're seeing that we might be able to tackle?
Yeah, we've got plenty of questions. So one question people were asking is, thinking about audiences, how would you advise choosing the workshop or the game?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of the way I think about when to use the workshop versus when to use the game, there are a few different characteristics. So one is the amount of time you have available. The EnROADS Climate Workshop works really well in shorter, condensed amounts of times. You could run an EnROADS Climate Workshop in 10 minutes of just sitting there talking it over with a small group of people, or in front of a large group of people if you're just slotted into a window of time. But of course, the EnROADS Climate Workshop can go much longer as well. I would say, and Florian and Kurt both highlighted this, there are dynamics that emerge within the climate action simulation that you just don't see within the workshop. These are these emotions that arrive. People have lots of energy. They're feeding off of each other and playing these roles. You don't quite get that as much in the workshop. The workshop is also, I would say, sometimes I think about it too in terms of the audience you're working with and how much familiarity they have with climate solutions to start with. So the workshop, people are proposing just for solutions that they know of. Sometimes we use a framing question like, what are the types of climate solutions that you're working on that if applied globally would make some impact? And then people will propose things that they already know of. I think of the climate action simulation, people can show up and maybe they're just learning about climate solutions, or they haven't formed opinions on what's high leverage or not. Or maybe they don't want to, it's in an environment where they don't need to share their personal opinions or their beliefs about what makes a difference, or their thoughts about what makes a difference. And then the game can provide a way for people to just role play rather than share their personal thoughts on things. So those are some of the differences. We've been seeing a lot of educators use the climate action simulation, but it can be used in all different kinds of settings.
Thanks. And as a good segue point, can you speak to whether the game can be run for people without a background in climate or a background in energy, and how maybe you can emphasize certain parts of the introduction and background to support that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it definitely works great with people who don't have a lot of background on climate. I ran the climate action simulation last year for a group of, it was like a business leadership group in the town I live in, Asheville. And it was different people from different sectors in the community, education, healthcare, finance, and they didn't think about climate change every day, but they were in this leadership group and came together for the sustainability day, and they participated in the climate action simulation. And because they were playing roles and were given that briefing statement, they didn't have to have a lot of background knowledge about climate science or any of those different aspects. You may choose to add in some climate impacts and some background on climate change into your opening remarks as the UN Secretary General. We tend to encourage people to keep those remarks fairly brief, to just keep the energy level of the whole experience up. As soon as people start getting into the negotiations, that's when they get really engaged. And people, if you spend too long in the introductory remarks, sometimes people won't catch everything because they won't have focus yet. So you can also weave it in as you go and figure out, talk about different climate dynamics as you want to bring them up in the role-playing game itself.
Great, thanks. Can you speak to both the ideal or the limitations of like age for the audience, and then also speak to what the smallest possible audience number could be?
Mm-hmm. In terms of age, I would say that I could imagine the climate action simulation working really well with teenagers. So maybe down to as young as 13 or 14 years old, even younger than that. And I think it could still work. You're gonna need to spend more time making sure to be careful about the vocabulary that you're using and making sure that the students are up to speed and comfortable with different aspects. Of course, gauge your audience. It can work well in some younger student groups. Recently, one of our colleagues, Linda, ran the climate action simulation with a group of high school students that were particularly interested in environmental and climate science and policy. And it worked really well with them because they were kind of engaged, already very interested in this topic. It might be more challenging in topics where you are working with younger kids who just aren't interested. So, sense out the audience you're working with, but can definitely work with those younger groups and, on up from there. Definitely at the college level, graduate level, and out into the professional world or in community groups and that kind of thing. It can work with all different kinds of people. We really design our tools at Climate Interactive. We think of it sometimes as somebody who can, read the New York Times or the Guardian, some of these international newspapers. That's kind of the learning ability we're trying to tune our work towards and strive towards, at least. In terms of the group size, I would say you could go as small as 6 people, 1 person for each group. Maybe you don't even have, maybe if you only have 5 people, you only run it with 5 groups. And that would be the minimum amount. The groups, then it would make your negotiating sessions it might make them shorter because then each individual, as they're representing an entire group, only has to come up with the policies that they themselves want. But that can work. And we've tested a few small climate action simulations before, and they seem to work pretty successfully. You can have a more intimate conversation as people talk about the different interests that they are considering with the groups that they're representing. And in terms of the largest size, I would say, I think of each group as really ideally having like 5 people in them. So if you have 6 groups, then that's 30 people. If you're playing with 8 groups, 40 people. On up above 40 people, start to get a little tight. You have groups in which there's always a couple people who just aren't really participating. People kind of sit out. I've seen it still works, and you can try it, but I would be hesitant to go above 60 or 70 people in size, and that's one of the challenges of running these climate action simulations virtually when we have so much interest in these tools these days, is that the small numbers that the climate action simulation can accommodate. We've been running a lot more workshops because we can have 300, 400, 500 people on the EnROADS climate workshops, and they run very smoothly.
Great, thanks. One participant asked, what is a recommended number of proposal rounds or negotiation rounds?
I would recommend 2 proposal rounds. That's enough for everyone to get a sense of the game, and you might be able to get to below 2 degrees within those 2 rounds. If you have time, You could do a third round, and sometimes I've run the third round as kind of an abbreviated round where perhaps there isn't negotiations. It'll just be, I'll say something like, okay, we've finished the second round. We're at 2.8 degrees. Can I get a proposal from a group? Just shout it out or write it into the chat box of an additional action that you would like to see. And then groups, well, it'll be a little more ad hoc where groups will throw out different ideas and we'll test those out. And that's a way to kind of quickly move through a third round to make sure you have time for the debrief. But you might be working in a setting where you can expand it outwards and have 3 or more rounds of negotiation. But I think the ideal amount is to just keep it at 2.
Great. How do you decide the order of the groups presenting their proposals?
That's a really good question. We've been playing around with different ideas on this. But just in general, it doesn't matter too much. It works. However whoever you want to call on first to present their proposal, call on them first. I sometimes will think about it though, in terms of where I want to place the conventional energy group. Sometimes I'll put them as like the second to last or somewhere in the middle, and I won't call on them first, and I also won't call on them last, because it's the conventional energy group in particular that are sometimes playing they're playing the more critical role where they're maybe they might remove a policy that they don't like that another group has imposed, or they might propose something that's just outlandish that all the other groups are outraged about. And so it gives a chance for the other groups to see that and react to it. So that's one consideration I'll sometimes think about, is the place conventional energy fits. But experiment with what you think makes the most sense.
Great, thanks. I know we talked a little bit about this earlier, but what do you what's like the exact timeline of how you might recommend sharing the simulator with participants? Like at what point would you recommend introducing it to them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also I want to note too that I see we've crossed the top of the hour. So if you have to run and move on to the rest of your day, by all means, go for it. Don't let us hold you up. And if you have a few more minutes, we can answer a few more questions here. The recording, as well as the slides, will be sent out afterwards in an email, so you'll have that. And thanks everyone for joining us. Really appreciate all the questions and engagement from everyone. And yeah, we'll stick around for some more questions, but don't want to hold up anyone who is trying to move on to something else today. And so Caroline, can you repeat your question?
Yeah, can you just reiterate at what point you might recommend sharing access to the simulator with participants?
Yeah, so this can be done different ways. You could not give your participants access to the simulator at all throughout the climate action simulation. I've done that several times, particularly in environments where the participants don't have a computer or they don't have the ability to access the simulator. So there are limitations there. Of course, in the virtual, when running climate action the simulation virtually, everyone is already sitting at their computers, so it's very easy for them to pull it up in their browsers. In which case, you might decide after the first round of negotiations to leak or share En-ROADS at that point with your participants so that they can explore more. And this might be particularly helpful if you see your participants kind of stumbling over or not sure which solutions might make the biggest difference, and you want to give them a chance to dive in and play around with it some. On the other hand, maybe you want to just keep it streamlined and not invite the users the participants to use En-ROADS. However, if you choose to take that route, you might see what Caroline talked about earlier, which is that people will look up En-ROADS themselves and find their way to it. So know that very well may happen, and your groups may discover En-ROADS and decide to play with it, which you can all laugh about, call it corporate espionage or whatever you want to as a result.
Great, thanks. So within every group, there's always going to be a small subset of people who are not hopeful or lacking enthusiasm at the end. What's your best tip on how to uplift these people, and do they ever become a bit disruptive to the process? How do you advise dealing with that?
Yeah, that's a good question. And every situation can be different. One of the strategies that I've used, particularly in the debrief section of the simulation, you'll do the 1 minute of silence, and you'll just ask people to take off, to stop playing their roles, and ask them how they're feeling. And in a physical environment where people are in person, when I ask that question, how are you feeling? I'll oftentimes have people physically move to different corners of the room. There might be some way in which we could recreate this virtually, but have people, if they're feeling sad or mad or glad, go to different areas, and then they see who else from the entire group is also feeling the way they're feeling. And at that point, then I'll go around the room and I will call on people to share their reflections. The people who are feeling sad and then mad, and I'll finish. In this case, I will be particular about my order. I'll finish with the group, whoever is standing in the glad category. Sometimes it's just one person, and they just have a particularly hopeful or optimistic bent on the way they see the world. And that'll be my person that'll give a positive spin on what is a tough scenario, tough situation. Of course, you can play with En-ROADS and you can see the possibilities out there, but it's also challenging. Here we are sitting in this time of this global pandemic and watching governments really struggle to address a major crisis that is gripping our world. And this is all within a lens of which climate change is still happening. And so in thinking about change and how it happens, it's loaded, and there's a lot of different feelings and perspectives out there. And talking about it is one good step. You're as a facilitator, you're not there to fix the world's problems for people, but try and give people some space to air it out. But then don't let it take up too much space. Kind of strike that balance. If you have a disruptive person, be careful with how much floor space you give them, and try and keep it light and move on when you can.
Awesome, thanks, Ellie. Someone was wondering if we've surveyed participants to identify the level of their boosted climate knowledge or any other insights we have there.
So we have done some of that, and we'll probably continue to do more of it. I mentioned at the very beginning, we have a paper that was published in the journal Simulation and Gaming. You can find this over on the Climate Action Simulation webpage, and you can read about the study that we did. Here it is. Read the peer-reviewed paper on the game. And there we were doing pre-surveys and post-surveys to learn about what kind of motivations and awareness about climate change people had going into the game, and then how much they had afterwards. And our partner on a lot of our research that we've done on, excuse me, in terms of the learning impacts of the climate action simulation and other games is Dr. Juliette Rooney-Varga of the University of Massachusetts Lowell Climate Change Initiative. And she and Florian, who we heard from earlier, and others on our team have worked closely on putting some of these studies together.
Great, thanks, Ellie. And I think I'll do one more. As a facilitator, can you show people again where we can discuss the considerations for like co-benefits and multi-solving in the En-ROADS simulator, and maybe give some tips on how to incorporate these into the game conversations? Yeah,
so that's a great question. So first, in terms of the process, and where co-benefits and equity considerations might fit in. There, I would say ask your participants to identify those co-benefits. I'm looking for the slide that has that on it. Ask your participants to identify co-benefits in their plenary speeches. So in the speech, when the groups come back from their first round of negotiations or their second round of negotiations and they propose a policy, in that 2-minute speech, ask them to identify co-benefits in that speech. So they'll have to come up with something. And in some cases, your participants might be, maybe they don't have enough background knowledge to come up with something, in which case you can provide that and you could suggest something. So if maybe the group is proposing to tax coal, and then you say, well, what are some of the other benefits that could come from less coal use? And ask the participants, if they didn't include it in their speech to propose the tax on coal, to come up with that and identify those. And if you yourself are also looking for more ideas on where to learn about co-benefits, we have a few different resources for you. So I'm turning here to the simulator itself. If you click on the 3 dots for any of these different sliders, you'll go into the advanced view, and then you see this I button here with a circle around it. Click on that. And as you scroll through this, we have a section on the potential co-benefits of discouraging coal or of promoting energy efficiency. And we've got a few different highlights there. Also, we're emphasizing different equity considerations, and soon we will be adding to this section some case studies, so individual studies that are out there that you can read about. You saw here, actually, let me just explain what I just did here. I clicked this little square with the arrow coming out of it that is here in the information box. This pops it out into the En-ROADS guide itself, and you can scroll through there and see that we're adding case studies, so you can see some examples and that you can use as talking points too, and more will be added there. In addition to that, if you go to support.climateinteractive.org, we're also adding in more frequently asked questions, and there's also the forum in which you can utilize to get more support and to dig into some of these topics.
Great, thanks. And I said last question, but we actually have one last thing. Some people are asking how they can participate in a session as a participant. And although we're not running the climate action simulation publicly, soon we could be in the future. And maybe if you could just point them to the workshop we'll be running in June, in case anyone missed the last one or has yet to participate in a workshop.
Yeah, so the place to stay tuned, and we oftentimes will send out emails too, so we'll keep you posted over email, but we do have a En-ROADS climate workshop coming up on June 9th that you're welcome to participate in. I know many of you all have already participated in these workshops, and that may have been what brought you into the Mastering En-ROADS training series itself, but there will be one held at the same time this webinar is being held at the 2 p.m. Eastern block, as well as one in the 7 a.m. Eastern time zone that you can sign up for here. Also, I will say, although we don't have any climate action simulations on the calendar to invite you all to, we do have videos, and we'll hopefully have more videos soon, but we do have videos that you can watch, and we'll send out a link to those so you can kind of get a sense for some of the gameplay if you're interested in trying this yourself.
Perfect, thanks. And that link to the workshop registration is in the chat as well, and will also be in the follow-up email. So be sure to sign up if you're interested. And I think we can wrap up with questions.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for your participation today, and congrats on making it to the third of this series in the Mastering En-ROADS webinar series. I will be back next week. We'll be digging into En-ROADS more, so I'm looking forward to that. Looking forward to talking with you all again, and in the meantime, We'd love to see more pictures of En-ROADS and dogs, and also En-ROADS and your family members or friends and people you're engaging with. So get out there, try it out, test out, explain the dynamics, and doing mini workshops with those around you to practice. And we'll talk to you next week. Thanks, everyone.